So I'm assuming, hopefully, if most of you are here, you're familiar with Cuphead. And so basically this is just a, thank you. Thanks to MAGFest for having me here. This is, it's been great fun so far. Did anyone see the show last night? Yeah. Excellent. It was late. But thanks for coming out to that too. So this is, I guess the format of this is more or less Q&A style. So if feel free to interrupt with any questions. There's a microphone right there, and there's one on the side. Although there's not going to be hordes of people, so use the one in the middle is fine. Yeah. So the music of Cuphead came about. I'll just talk briefly about the development. So Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, who made Cuphead, I've been friends with them since about grade 5, and so then 6-7 years ago-ish, they had this idea for this, at the time, very tiny game, and they asked me if I was interested in writing music for it. And it was really outside of my field of expertise. I'm more of my main gig is as an orchestral percussionist in Toronto. I do lots of freelance work in that area, and I also do a decent amount of playing in the jazz field as well, but mostly orchestral playing. And I've done basically next to no composing before Cuphead. So when they asked me if I was interested in doing it, I promptly said no a couple of times, because it's like, you guys should probably find someone who actually knows how to write. And but I think it was a small field. I was the only musician that they really knew, and so they were quite keen on still working. I think they wanted to keep a small team of friends, kind of, which was, so it ended up working out well. And initially also the game was a lot smaller than it ended up becoming. Like the scope of the game that they released in 2017 was closer to what they had envisioned with their original sort of dream scope of what they wanted the game to be. And what they were originally planning was a lot smaller. I think it was probably just one island instead of the 4 that are there. They sort of had to cut back based on team size, and obviously, like, it's a very time-consuming game to make with the animation. So that and money, and then as the game picked up sort of steam, particularly thanks to I think of the 2015 E3 trailer, we sort of promptly upped the scope of the game. So nothing in the game. It never started out as this huge, 3-hour soundtrack. It started out as something that was a lot smaller. It was going to be probably MIDI with hire like a live rhythm section to play along with it to give it some life. So we were thinking, $10,000-$12,000 maybe to record the soundtrack. That was the initial estimate, and it was obviously ballooned quite a bit past that in the end. And so yeah, I'll open the floor up to any questions if anyone wants to ask anything. And Kate, if you want to come up, and maybe if you don't mind. Kate Remington, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for coming out, and thank you again for the performance last night.
Oh, my pleasure.
Really appreciate it. So I have kind of like 2 questions. One of them is, so I'm an animator, and I was wondering if the idea of doing traditional animation, because that's what drew me towards the game, if that impacted your involvement, it made you want to desire to do it because that's a dying medium and whatnot. And the second one is, if you watched a lot of Tom and Jerry or any old-timey cartoons that helped bring the mood to what you wanted to bring together for the final piece.
I mean, the style of the game, I was obviously, it was writing in that style, trying to write something that fit what was there was obviously very important. But they'd start, no matter what kind of game they would have made, I would have been interested in, or they probably would have asked me to write music for it anyways. If they had done, a Hotline Miami kind of game or something, then I probably would have had to spend 4 years studying 80s chiptune metal. It would have been, the process probably would have been sort of the same. So definitely when they started, though, they had they were really good with sending me, they knew the aesthetic that they wanted not just visually but musically, like right off the bat. So they sent me some really obvious sort of cultural touchstones from that era musically, like Sing Sing Sing, some Cab Calloway stuff that they had sort of dug up, and they were like, this is the sound we want to go for on the soundtrack. So it was kind of, I had a lot of freedom within a very sort of small confines, but it was still, it had to fit in with their vision of what was going on. And then in terms of actually listening, I didn't really watch that many cartoons actually from the era. I spent a lot more time listening to big band stuff from the era that was not really cartoon related. The only thing I really ended up checking out the cartoons for was the barbershop title screen music, just to sort of see, like, a lot of those old cartoons have some sort of vocal ensemble sort of like leading off the cartoon. So I kind of wanted to match that aesthetic a little bit. But otherwise, though, most of them don't actually use, or it seemed to me like a vast majority of the ones I did watch, which was not too many, but they sort of had that more like cartoony chamber orchestra kind of sound, and which was not really what they wanted to go for.
Okay.
Possibly, like we've talked about, maybe like changing up the route for like Cuphead 2, if that ends up happening, like less big bandy and more, like I would be interested in experimenting more with that kind of Carl Stalling-esque composition style. That's, you know, like I've been watching a lot of Animaniacs actually lately, and it's like, you know, if you watch that and just pay attention to the music, it's crazy. Like the amount of how much it is synced up to what is going on visually is almost unbelievable, the amount of sort of work that's gone into that. So Cuphead has like literally 0% of that was purposely sunk up with anything going on visually. We just kind of also tried to nail a vibe and an aesthetic with the music. So like, not so much trying to match the levels or the bosses with following that with the music like a lot of games do, and like, you know, layering things. We just kind of wanted to, it was important, I think, to sort of just set down something which suited the mood. And then, so some people, it's interesting, some people sort of ask, like, I noticed that this lines up with this in this boss, or, you know, this musical cue seems to work with that. And whenever that happens, it's just totally circumstantial. It's like, so yeah, anyways.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
So I've noticed like there's a lot of like influence from like Raymond Scott and Cuphead, but were you getting any influences from game composers?
Yeah, I mean, my game composer influences are pretty standard. Uematsu was a big one. There's a couple Uematsu quotes sort of in there. Mitsuda is also, like, things that I grew up playing more so than anything. Like those two guys are my two biggest game composition influences. So there's some homages to them sort of hidden in some of the Cuphead music, and a couple of them that no one seemed to have found yet. But I didn't really listen to too much game music while researching that. It was more.
No.
Yeah, like the whole process was kind of like
I was just wondering,
as little as much as video game as possible in a sense.
I was just wondering like whether that kind of like influenced like how you were composing is more to like the sound of it, because it sounds pretty much just like a kind of studio jazz session, you know, more than anything.
Yeah, that was kind of, we were trying to go for more of a not a video game sound, yeah. I think, in a sense, yeah. I was definitely, but there are video game composers that I love, and I'm listening to a lot more now. But I wouldn't say that there was many that had much of an influence on the Cuphead soundtrack directly.
Okay.
So.
Is there any chance of a CD release?
I mean, they talk about it. I'm not sure yet.
Right,
I think there's all sorts of, like, we're going to do this, and then that gets canceled, and we're going to do this, and then that sort of gets postponed. So it's all just like business and how long everything takes. So I think they would like to do a CD release, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm 100% sure on where that's at the moment.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers for it. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm all right.
Good.
So when you work on a project for a long time, what are some things that you do to help get out of discouragement and maybe some burnout that you might come to? Like, what are some good conducive ways to do that and, you know, remotivate and get the creativity going again?
I actually ended up reading a large part of the Cuphead soundtrack process was me sitting in front of a piano banging my forehead on the keys. Like it was. So I think I get the impression it's the same with a lot of you read about. Not that I would compare myself to like Beethoven or anyone like that, but like you read about Beethoven and he's got just drawers and drawers of sketches that he did and threw away. Like I think a lot of the process is generally, for a lot of creative people, super frustrating, like the amount of stuff that you do, and then it's like, no, this is not good, and you sort of throw it away. Mm-hmm. I kind of found, I got really deep actually into reading books on the creative methods of other people in whatever disciplines. And so I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of like, I would read one book that I really liked was The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, and that was one of the first books I had read on that. And it's sort of like, you read one of them, and then like they'll reference a couple other books, and you read both of those, and they'll reference a couple other, and then you've sort of read, like I read like 20 books on different people's creative processes. Mm-hmm. And I think burnout is like it's a very real thing that happens. One thing I found, and I found this in performing life too, like when you're just practicing a lot, and you sort of reach a point where it's like, you feel like you're just sort of running into a wall, and it's like giving yourself permission to take a break, not just for like an afternoon, but like stepping away from a project for a bit is okay, I think. I think a lot of times we get really obsessed about like, not necessarily deadlines, but always keeping the creative juices flowing, and then when it sort of dries up, you try to power through it, and it's not really always helpful. Like sometimes it is, but I think for me, the more like the longer I've been playing and practicing music and now writing, like I sort of start to recognize the signs like this is not going anywhere, and it's okay to stop and not feel guilty about it, like I'm not getting something done. So I mean, I think for me those were the two big things, like sort of reading about other people's processes and realizing that a lot of people have the same issues, mm-hmm. and then also just letting yourself sort of like take time away from a project. It's not like if you have like legitimate deadlines coming up, then it's, those can be, I actually found also with Cuphead though, I was writing a lot of stuff and there was not really like a deadline in sight, like because the game kind of kept getting delayed. And so even the tunes that were done from like earlier on, I would kind of go back and like just mess with, and they didn't need any, you kind of just get obsessive and it's like, well, this note can move here. And like there's a point where you need to stop doing that. And so also like having a hard deadline can be super productive in terms of you actually sit down and finish things. And so it's really tough to work on. What I found early on was it was really hard to work on things because you're always trying to generate ideas, but then you're never actually finishing them, mm-hmm. because you're always sort of going back to them. So that's like having the legitimate deadlines without these long-term projects looming is also kind of useful. And you're not always going to have control over that, obviously. But if you're suffering burnout and someone gives you a deadline, then you might actually find that you'll power through easily. So I do have a list of, I should post it on my Twitter or something, but I've been keeping actually a list of all of the interesting and useful books that I read from different people on that subject. So maybe I'll put it on Twitter or send me an email and I can send you that list. But
awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of creative folks go through the exact same feelings a lot of the time, and it's, you just sort of learn to deal with it on your own. But getting yourself to the burnout point and then trying to power through is probably not always a great idea. Uh-huh. Like, it's just going to make things worse, so.
Okay, well, hey, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, 2 questions. I was just wondering what kind of like major difficulties there were in making Cuphead and making music for Cuphead. Were there any just like points of just like, we're not going to be able to do it or something like that?
Well, I mean, that was one of them. Like, am I going to be able to do this? Well, other than what we sort of just talked about, I think for me, one of the really difficult things with Cuphead specifically was trying to write in a really derivative style that has its own set of stylistic markers and cliches and things like that, and then try and to not just plagiarize ideas and try to like take those things and make them your own. Like that was super challenging because there are things, you know, like if you write a ragtime tune, like there's a handful of things that define what ragtime is, and you didn't invent those, you know. So you have to figure out how to use them without just like taking them and then plugging them in somewhere. So that was challenging with Cuphead, was kind of trying to maintain my own individuality in there, but within the pretty strict confines of what defines these couple of styles that we were working in. Ragtime was worse than the big band stuff, but it was. That was for me one of the biggest challenges, was always sort of questioning, like, does this sound authentic but still original? That was important. So.
And also, what's just like in the future for you as a composer and Cuphead?
The DLC is coming out in theory this year, I guess.
Are you looking at anything else other than Cuphead?
Pardon me?
Are you thinking of being composer other than Cuphead?
I mean, I've been approached with a few projects, but I also like. Composing is still sort of a side job in a sense. Like I'm still a full-time performer, and that's kind of how I define myself. So, and also like I got better at writing as Cuphead went along, but it's still, I'm very, very slow. So I think I would need to pick projects based on like, you know, if they have a long-term timeline, which Cuphead obviously does because it takes forever to make. And you know, I'm happy to work. I want to work with the team that I get along with and I like, and so I'm very happy at working for MDHR at the moment. So if they keep doing things and they keep wanting me to write, I would do that. But I would hesitate to take on too many other things because I'm already borderline overloaded in a sense. So, and it's partially my own shortcomings as a composer, because I don't know how people write for like TV or film, where it's every week you have to have 40 minutes of music, or like, here's this completed film, it's releasing in a month. You know, can you write the score? Like that to me is wild. And so that's something I'd like to work on that area of like being able to write quickly. But yeah, but no, other than that, no, there's nothing on the horizon other than Cuphead DLC and then maybe future Cuphead stuff.
Oh,
so
cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I guess I'm really curious about the development process for each piece in Cuphead. How does a song go from, banging your head on the keyboard to being included in the game? Were there a lot of songs that either got scrapped because of your own personal opinion, or that you presented to the rest of the team and then they decided it needed revision or just to be removed?
There was a number of tunes that I thought were good, that particularly Chad was one who was really good at saying like, this is not going to work somewhere in the game. And his vision is actually like, he was able to see like the completed game. So he would ask, they would be like, can you write something in this style for this kind of boss? And I'd be like, I'd write something, I'm like, this is perfect. And he'd be like, this is not going to work at all. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is exactly what you asked for. And then I would see the final, there was things I'd see in the final game and I'd be like, oh, I see why that wasn't going to work. Like he sort of already understood that.
Huh.
So I think the Cuphead tunes are basically numbered. And the earliest tune that made it into the game was Honeycomb Herald, which was Cuphead 7, I think. And I think the last tune that made it into the game was like Cuphead 150 or something. 149 or 150. So in between, there was 56 tracks on the album, and there's like maybe 90 some other things which are not. Some of them were just ideas, some of them were sketches, some of them were pretty complete, and we cut them. So there was a decent amount of unused ideas for sure, and there's probably a good reason why a lot of them were left unused. And yeah, like in terms of just developing ideas, like also one of the hardest things, going back to what was difficult, was coming up with ideas that sounded original as well. And I think for me, a lot of that is doing a lot of listening. And I'm still doing, like right now, I'm going chronologically through the Duke Ellington catalog, and it's like, it's so many things from the 30s, like hundreds of recordings. And you listen to those, and then if you just get those sounds in your mind and then kind of go away, and like you'll maybe find yourself like humming humming an idea or an idea that comes up, and then it's kind of, I'm gonna go back and listen to these and see if this is an original idea or not. And like that was, part of the process, was just developing ideas that way. So
For a typical game, when a composer's writing like a boss battle or exploration music, they have to think about how the music is going to break up into like a little stem, or how it's going to loop and then layer depending on how intense things get. But with Cuphead, it seems like you wrote them more like as set pieces with a beginning and a middle and an end. Is that right?
yeah, I think we didn't quite know how to deal with the concept of dynamic music, like a lot of games do. I think a lot of it is because it's like MIDI generated, or because we were recording live, so it was tough to conceptualize, like, how are we going to like layer these tunes with the progression of the boss. And so we decided, like, let's just write full length, we'll go with full length tunes. And as long as the tunes are exciting enough, they don't necessarily need to like progress with the boss. And so instead of having layers like you would have in a normal game, what we did to make the music, like, we were still like, how do we make this not the same every time? Like, how do we still add a level of dynamicness to it? And so what we ended up doing was all of the improvised solos on most of the tracks were recorded after the sessions, and we would have each one of the soloists come in and play a bunch of solos over a bunch of the different tunes. And then so like, say like you'll play Honeycomb Herald, and the first solo you might hear on your first playthrough is a trombone and then a vibraphone solo. And then if you die and you play it again, you'll hear the same tune, but then you'll hear a trumpet solo and a saxophone solo the next time, kind of thing. So there's actually like some of the tunes have 6 or 7 different versions in the game, but they're it's the same piece of music. So that was kind of our way of dealing with trying to keep things interesting, but yeah, like, the tunes themselves are just complete 4-minute works. Also, partially, we were conceptualizing it like, the idea of, it'll be cool, like, if you can sit down and actually listen to this as an album. Mm-hmm. And which is not saying you can't do that, obviously, with most game music, but you listen to most game music and it, starts, does this thing, repeats, and then fades out, because there's no ends to the tunes. And I was like, why write 95% of a tune and then fade it out at the end? So I was like, I want all of these tunes to have legitimate endings. You can't hear them in the game because I think they repeat back before you get there, but it's kind of something special for if you're going to sit down and listen to it like on its own, then it sounds like an actual album of tunes. Huh. So that was one more thing that that's probably way divergent from your question, but
no,
yeah.
I appreciate the detail. Thank you.
Or if you die like I do, keep dying over and over, you never do get to hear the end of things. The only way to hear it is by listening to the album. So.
Oh yeah, we actually realized way too late in the process that most of the tunes are about twice as long as they needed to be anyways, because you can't, like, you get halfway through the tune but you either would have won or you'd be dead by that point. So you don't even hear, it's not like you hear like the very ends of the tunes, you don't even hear like the last third of a lot of the tunes, because it's like, unless you're like purposely not shooting but just trying to avoid things. So, but I'm glad we did it the way we did it. I'm happy with the way it turned out, so. Yeah, hey.
Hi. Kind of a two-part question. Number one, since you're a performer and also a composer, one of the difficulties of being, from my perspective, of being a composer is making the decision of how much control you either give the performers or how much you take for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to know, like, kind of in the process, how much control you officially or overall had between pencil and paper to the complete end product. So, did you have to wear a lot of hats? Like, did you engrave? Did you have to deal with all the, the part setting and things like that? Were you in charge more with like the mixing, or was that someone else that kind of did a lot of that extra stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I did all of the engraving parts of, like, myself. I wrote on keyboard, but then used Sibelius's notation, and so I'm the one that dealt with making the scores, making the individual parts. And we sort of knew, like, it's the nature of the music in a sense that, especially if you hire a real orchestra or a real band, like everyone's going to bring their own. It's not just that they're going to make, you know, mistakes here and there. It's going to be there's going to be a human element to it, which was super important, I think, to us as well. And, you know, there are mistakes on the album, but having the real musicians there sounds so much better than having the MIDI stuff that we did. So I wasn't particularly control freaky when we were recording. Like, there's things that are objectively wrong, and then things which are like
Jazz.
maybe loose,
Yeah,
but sound
yeah.
great. So we kept a lot of those because it's like, you know, why try and make this too, like it sounds a lot more realistic if it sounds like humans playing these tunes. So, you know, there was a certain amount of control in that we had different takes that we could choose from, and we could, you know, we could say like, we need a better take. But I wasn't particularly concerned about, I wanted to have all the musicians to bring their own personalities to their parts, and I think that was important, and I think it came through, hopefully, in the music. But also, it was, you know, we hired, there's a important long-term Canadian big band called the Boss Brass, and they were around for 30 or 35 years, I think.
Yeah.
And they've been, I think, defunct now for maybe like 10 years. But a lot of the guys from that band are still around and playing, so it was important to us to not just hire a group of. It's like if you go see like a symphony orchestra versus going to see like a pickup orchestra playing the same tune.
They know.
Yeah, there's a cohesiveness that's missing from the thing. So we wanted, particularly with the big band tunes, to have a group of musicians who's played together. You know, a lot of them played together for decades. So not only did they have fun at the sessions, but they sort of knew each other's playing.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm actually asking, is because the end result is really cohesive. And if you have, you know, professional musicians that don't really play well together or haven't played together, you don't really get that. So it's great. So.
Yeah, I think that was, I mean, we were very conscious of making sure to hire in that manner, I think. The ragtime tunes were less so much like that. Like, I kind of wanted to hire my friends to play on those because I played drums on those, so I wanted to have a good time. But those were less important, though, to have that sound too. So, and then in the mixing process too. Sorry, we finished so early because like they kind of gave us this like we need these tunes by the end of like summer of 2016, I think, and then the game got pushed back to 2017. So we had like a year. So we spent the better part of a year in the mixing process, actually, really refining the sound that we were going for. It's got a vintage sound, but it's really clean, and it's kind of a unique sort of hybrid of two different things. So I didn't do the mixing, but I was in the studio for all of that, and I had, you know, a lot of control over like what I don't want that to be so loud there, so can you bring that down? But I also left that to the expert to an extent. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what were some of the challenges with like the studio setup, getting the brass to play nicely with the drums and that kind of thing? Who did you use to set up the studio and do that?
Well, we recorded at Canterbury Studios in Toronto, and the guy who runs Canterbury, Jeremy Darby, is a genius. He's done sound for, he toured with Bowie, he toured with Prince, he was buddies with Lou Reed, did sound for Ella Fitzgerald at Radio City. Like, he's kind of just one of these guys who's been doing this for 50 years and has just worked with everybody, and he's got incredible ears and an incredible selection of vintage microphones.
Oh, cool.
And we set up, for anyone interested in the technical sort of specifics, like we set up, you can see it on the video actually, like on the live videos from the sessions. It's all the horns and the piano were in the main room, and then drums were in a booth, but they could see each other, and guitar was in another booth. And so there was isolation, which we sort of needed, but they had headphones, everyone could hear each other, and it was not like exactly like playing on a stage, but it was still a fairly intimate process that was live off the floor with all of them playing together. So
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
potentially heated question for you.
Okay.
You were talking about ragtime music and sort of trying to stay idiomatic to the genre. And there's a certain run and gun theme that sort of sounds like Super Mario World. Is that a subtle nod, or is that just idiomatic to ragtime and it just happened?
It's idiomatic to ragtime. You know what? The amount of people who have commented on that one, for the amount of other game themes that I like stole and hid in Cuphead.
Oh, so there are stuff.
And that no one has found yet, which blows my mind. That is, it's if I played like Super Mario World like 20 years ago. Like I wasn't listening to that. So to answer your question, it was completely accidental. And had I known the controversy that was going to cause, I would have not put it in there. But that particular lick is it's kind of a ragtime cliche. It's called the secondary ragtime rhythm. I mean, that's what Harriet Yanish and, I'm going to get really technical, in their book Ragtime, Harriet Yanish and Rudy Blesch, I believe they're the ones that maybe termed that the secondary ragtime rhythm, like that 2/3, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then the chord progression is a series of secondary dominants, and then the end of it, dun 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 dun, is just a really cliche ragtime thing. And so when Koji Kondo wrote that, he was also like ripping off something from 70, 80 years previous to that too. So it just so happens like the way that we did ours sounds very much similar to the Mario one. But, and not that I mean, obviously Koji Kondo is a genius, but I think he also knew like, this is a kind of a ragtime cliche and it sounds appropriate for the thing. So I would definitely own it if I did it on purpose.
Cool.
But
And then you also had said that you were learning a lot as you were composing the album as the process went on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you look back on now that it's done and the game is out that you wish you had done differently or you could change if you had the opportunity to?
Oh yeah, there's all, like now when I listen to it, there's all these little things that I was like, well, I would do that differently now. And there's definitely a couple tunes, you know, everyone's like, no one wants to admit they have their favorite children, but they do. But you know, when you have 56 kids, there's definitely some which are pretty low on the ladder. So there's a handful of tunes in there that I just completely despise. I won't say which ones, but I mean, other people, you know, it's funny. Then some people say like, oh, that's one of my favorite tunes from the game, you know. So it's like, I don't think anything is too terribly bad, but yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, he asked my question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges writing the barbershop, because when we talked for our episode, you were mentioning that was kind of an unexpected challenge because barbershop has its own set of like conventions and rules.
Yeah. Can you? Is her mic on? Can you hear the? Okay. Sorry, I'm hearing mine really clearly, but
Yeah, I know.
okay. That's, so, anyways, yeah, Kate was asking about writing for the barbershop. And so that was really interesting. Chad had originally, like, if you watch some of the really early gameplay footage from like E3 and things like that, you'll see like the original title screen, which was pretty quickly done. And Chad had hired this group that's based in Ontario and New York, Shoptimus Prime, and they're a barbershop group. And I think he found them online. I'm not entirely sure how he found them. And they had recorded something quick for that demo. And so we wanted to do a legitimately sort of written out barbershop thing for the intro to Cuphead, which is what ended up being there. So I had already written a sort of a vocal intro, but it wasn't particularly barbershop-y. And so I was talking to those guys, and they sort of hit me to this, it's the Barbershop Arranging Society manual. The Barbershop Society is like this they're like the Masons. They're like this secret society. And so I got my hands on this book, and it's like literally 2 inches thick, and it's like the only book on barbershop arranging. And so I kind of ended up having to reverse engineer the title screen music to have a bit more of the barbershop sort of styles in it. And then I kind of figured, like, I've already gone this far just for this. I'd kind of like to try writing a legitimate, like a more accurate and legitimate barbershop tune from scratch. And so that's sort of how A Quick Break came about. Also because we're like, they're going to be in the studio. They're going to be there for 20 minutes. We might as well, keep them there and have them record another tune. So, and that one also went through I had a bunch of really like sort of meta, like one of them was like, we'll play it after the game is over and tell people, try New Game Plus mode. And then the other one was like, apologizing for like the delay of the game. Like those were the lyrics, and then Chad was like, no, these are all way too meta. You can't write anything like that. So he was the one who suggested something about taking a break. So that's kind of where that came about. But it's yeah, it's a radically different style. Like the voice leading is different, and the way that the chords all work, and the lead voice that sings is not the high voice. It's like the second highest voice is the main, which is totally weird. And so that was a big learning curve trying to figure out how to do that too. Yeah. But
well, and making the words fit with the melody is like a real challenge too. And I love how in the Take a Break one, you kind of thought about, well, what would people do in the early 20th century if they were taking a break, go outside and rake and stuff like that? And so
yeah, part of it was just like what rhymes with break, and but also I think I ended up Googling like what were pastimes in the 1920s. So yeah, that's where that came from. But yeah.
So, well, we were talking last night about arrangements that are coming out for some of the tracks on Cuphead that you could play in your band or your ensemble. So why don't you talk about
Oh yeah, so we are, it took us, this was like a long process to get to this point because we were examining numerous other avenues, but we've had so many requests for charts, mostly from elementary and high school students who like want to play the music. And like, obviously the professional level charts are definitely beyond those levels of skill. Like those are pro level charts. So finally, since the fall, we have been working, John Herberman, who did the conducting on the Cuphead videos and the conducting on the soundtrack, and he was sort of my guru on the whole project. He is arranging a bunch of tunes for elementary concert band arrangements, high school jazz band arrangements, and then we're going to release some of the pro charts as well as they are, and then augmented for more modern-sized big band. And I think they're basically done. I just need to finish writing some bios for them, and then we need to get the website up. But hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we will have proper arrangements for various ensembles of some of the tunes from the game. So if anyone, I don't know, if anyone runs like concert bands or if you're music teachers, like that would be, maybe of interest. So it was really important to us. We sort of realized early on, I think also after the E3 trailer, that there was this realization like, this game has the potential to be, bigger than we were expecting. And there sort of came with that a bit of a responsibility to really try and do the style as properly as possible without delving into any sort of like parody and, like respecting that era and for what it is and doing it the best we can. So, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there.
Oh, but it's really cool because what I have found is a lot of people that I've talked with never got a chance to hear Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington's band or Benny Goodman's amazing band from the 30s and 40s with Lionel Hampton and Gene Krupa, and now thanks to Cuphead, you get a sense of that sound, and so
that's what I was saying. Yeah, like we sort of felt like this might actually introduce a whole new demographic to this type of music, and you see it like there's the console last night. Like big band is not like particularly trendy at the moment, but it's something that they're still doing. Like it's a great art form, and so. There was this point where it's like, we really have to like nail the aesthetic of Cuphead properly because just out of respect for the music, but also for anyone who's maybe like, I would actually like to check out some other big band music now from that era. So, yeah.
Well, I was curious about, since you're a professional percussionist in an orchestra and you accompany, or your orchestra accompanies ballets, did that help at all? Because ballet music is, written to accompany the dancers. I mean, did that give you any extra insight for how the music was going to support a game, or?
Maybe not directly. I think, if anything, I found that playing in an orchestra and like being involved in music for as long as I have now, like it gave me a certain amount of objectivity. Like I could, if I was writing something and it didn't work, and like, why does this sound, like I was able to step back from it often and at least sort of determine like what is not working with it. why does this, what sounds wrong about this, you know? And like, does this sound like something else? I'm gonna go listen to that and see why that works and why this is not working.
Yeah.
So I think not so much playing for ballet directly, but I think just being sort of in that world, being in any sort of musical world for a long time, hopefully will give you a certain amount of just being able to listen to something and say like, what's going on here, you know? Yeah.
So, well, you also worked with a really amazing arranger, this composer who helped you kind of work out the orchestration for the Cuphead tracks and stuff. So talk a little bit about him.
Well, that was John Herberman again. Yeah, he was. I ended up getting. I was looking for. I wasn't necessarily looking for a teacher per se, but I was looking for someone to sort of guide me, like in the early days of the process. Like I'm happy to write these tunes myself, but I don't want to show up. For me, it was when we also knew we were going to be hiring a real band. Like, it's one thing to write something, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But to show up with a full band looking at you and then giving them charts which are unplayable or like don't work, you know, like I was desperately trying to avoid just looking like an idiot, and also like waste. You show up at a studio, like it's very expensive. So if you put something in front of them that literally doesn't work, it's going to cost a fortune to have them sit there while you like try and figure out why it doesn't work. So yeah, I was very fortunate, and this I think is anyone I think starting any particular endeavor like this, it would be beneficial to find somebody to sort of at least guide you through the process, and at least from a starting angle, I guess. I did a lot of the study I did was sort of on my own, but he was able to look at what I was doing and tell me what wasn't going to work, and he would look at the trombone parts, and he knows, he's not a trombone player, but he can visualize sort of the slide, and he's like, this is way too fast because you're going from first position to seventh position on this thing, so you're going to have to rewrite this.
Yeah.
So,
Very cool.
Yeah, sorry, question.
You'd mentioned the charts were for a modern big band. How would that differ from the composition that you had for the final production?
So, typically, a modern big band has 4 trumpets, 4 bones, and 5 saxophones. And on Cuphead, we were going with a more vintage size. Like that wouldn't have been, in that era, that would have been less common of a size. Partially, it was a bit easier, I think, to write, a bit less daunting to write for a band that size. But also, I watched some videos of some groups playing some vintage music like that, and that was the instrumentation that we used in Cuphead, which was 3 trumpets, 2 bones, and 4 saxes, was a bit closer to that size of band that they would have been using. So, but if we release those charts and like a professional band wants to play them, you don't want to have like 3 or 4 members of the band just like sitting out, like we wanted to still give them something to do. So I think that's sort of why our approach is going to be like, if we release Clip Joint Calamity or something, we're gonna release it the way that it was, and then we're gonna have it. It's not gonna be radically different, but it'll just be augmented for a bigger band. So if that's the size of band that you have, which is probably, it's gonna be more common anyways, like it makes more sense to do that. But, so we're trying, we would like the music to be played, but it's also if people want to play the music, then we want it to work for their group. So it's, just trying to make everything as accessible as possible. Yeah. How are we doing for, we're good for time.
When you were composing, like at the piano, pencil and paper, I'm guessing, yeah? Or do you do more like directly into the computer?
I would figure it out on the piano, and then instead of pencil, I did some things on pencil and paper, but I would write it in Sibelius, but I wouldn't MIDI it in.
Okay.
Like I was still writing on the piano, but instead of writing it with pencil and paper, it was easier to just put it straight into Sibelius.
Okay.
Skip the middle. Although I actually am starting to write more with pencil and paper because I can see the benefit. You sort of think about things differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you doing more like grand staff, or were you doing more staves than that?
I think I mean,
first,
typically I would like set up the big band score, and then I might write it in the piano part, and then
like
sort
reduction
of
almost.
bring it out from there. Yeah.
Okay. Just
Did you use
curious.
samples at all, so you could hear what the instruments were what the blend was gonna sound like?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I used the Garriton Big Band plugin with Sibelius, which is not. I mean, it's good. It's not great. It's better than the Sibelius built-in jazz sounds. I mean, you get a general idea of how it's going to sound, but I think the idea is if you can make something sound good in MIDI, it's going to sound great with real players. Like once you get the overtones and stuff, we get the sounds of those real instruments. So if something sounds weird in MIDI, it still actually might sound good with real players. But if you can get it sounding great in MIDI, then it's going to sound awesome. So, sorry, next.
Yeah, good morning. So you mentioned how this music's kind of inspiring new generations that may not have been exposed to those genres, and obviously some of
Hopefully,
us are
hopefully, yeah.
But also we're seeing content creators on different, modern video game cover people. Are you surprised by some of the interpretations? I mean, not specific artists, but just in general, how some of them are taking that more ragtime feel and then converting into something that's more commonly seen on YouTube, or even stretching the artist in new ways that they probably have never covered before.
I mean, I think however I'm just flattered that anyone wants to do those tunes at all, and however they want to do them, if they want to do them as close to the original as they want, or as can, or if they want to do them in their own way, I think that's great. It's just nice to sort of have people interested in playing those things. There's certainly some questionable covers, but I think they're all really. There's so many different ones, and it's just great to sort of check out to see what people are doing. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So you had an amazing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I think he's just saying hi.
I was just saying what up. Oh.
IQ, everyone.
Oh, very cool. Great show yesterday. So you'd mentioned that after the live performance. Sorry.
Do you want to? No.
No. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Hey, I came in a little late, so hopefully no one asked this already. But so when you started on Cuphead, you kind of jumped into the big band genre without a ton of past experience, right?
With like zero past experience.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an understatement. So if some new game approached you with some new wild style that you've never touched before, and you got to pick what it was, what would you want to have trial by fire for?
You mean like game style or music style?
Music style.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good. I mean, this is sort of maybe this answer sort of on both sides of that. But I think it'd be fun to write for an RPG because I think there'd be a lot more freedom, like particularly like more less something that's really set in a specific area. But like I listen, I think Uematsu is probably my favorite games composer, and like specifically, Final Fantasy 6 and 7, and then going into 8 too, like the variety of different styles that he writes in, and the amount of too much freedom can be a bad thing. Like having constraints is really a good way to write, but I think it would be fun. Like I have lots of ideas for things that this wouldn't fit anywhere else other than maybe like some sort of wacky
a little
RPG.
A little more genre specific or a little more eclectic rather than just the whole game being one genre.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to write too much more in a big band style. I think
fair enough.
Yeah, okay. Partially I have no more ideas, but also it'd be fun to branch out, and I think that would be a fun next project for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So we're getting the time's up soon sign. Are there any more questions? Hey.
Hi, my name's Devin. I just had a quick question for you. Do you ever purposefully give yourself constraints? And if so, what do you give yourself when you're writing your music?
I mean, I think Cuphead had so many built-in constraints in the first place that I didn't have to really give myself too many on purpose. The idea makes a lot of sense, though. I think if you were, again, like writing in an RPG style, not that that's a style, but like there's so many different areas you could go, I think you'd still probably want to give yourself a few different constraints for each tune that you're writing. So I mean, I guess I can't really answer that super well because I didn't have much experience with that with Cuphead because it was so already like, this needs to be in a ragtime style or this needs to be in a 30s big band style, and that's kind of it.
Okay.
So, which is already like, those are pretty big constraints in the first place. So.
And the size of the ensemble too was set kind of limits too.
Well, also, yeah, like early on, like, you know, I'd already written tunes for a certain size of ensemble, and then as I got better at writing, like I didn't necessarily want to change that. So then that's true. That would also have been a limitation right there. Like,
So you actually went from larger ensembles to smaller?
no, we kept the same. The big band was the same size throughout.
Oh, okay.
But if I wanted to write for a bigger big band,
Then
it wouldn't have made much sense to only do that for some of the tunes. 'Cause I also like.
Got it.
Something that I've actually thought about a lot recently, like just checking out video game soundtracks, like for me, the ones that work the best are ones that have a consistent aesthetic somehow. Even if the tunes are super different, like Final Fantasy VII, tons of different styles of music, but there's whatever, you know, the MIDI package that was being used, like everything sounds like it's from the same sort of package. Like that gives everything sort of a cohesiveness.
Yeah, it was the Yamaha XG50 for that one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
PC side at least.
Yeah, and I think that there are some more modern ones I've heard where it doesn't... The music might be beautiful, but it's not... It doesn't all sound like it's from the same person or the same thing. So, I mean, I like, you know, if for Cuphead 2 we went with a larger big band, I would want to keep that same size for the whole game, you know? I don't necessarily want to do that for the DLC. I think I'd probably keep it similar to what we already wrote for, just to keep the sound the same.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is kind of a stupid quick question. Since you're such a big Uematsu fan, there's actually, I don't know if you've checked it out, there's this really cool Final Fantasy rhythm game in the arcade downstairs. So
the which one?
There's like a really cool like Final Fantasy rhythm game.
Oh, is there?
Down in the arcade, yeah, so I don't know if you want to go check it out.
Oh, okay, I haven't been down to the arcade yet.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I was playing it like at
Okay.
3 a.m. last night, so.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah. Actually, I recommend checking out Groove Catcher. That's not in the arcade, but that's it's like a demo game down there.
Yeah,
I had a good time with that the other day. It's a VR game, and it's you're trying to like catch. It's a rhythm game, but you're kind of like trying to catch these ribbons coming at you. With it's I don't know. It was fun. Anyways, that's downstairs. It's called Groove Catcher. Yeah. So.
Any last questions?
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming out. Yeah. Thanks, Kate, for moderating. Yeah. Thank you very much.